Congratulations on the purchase of your brand new Qidi printer. Once you plug that USB in and you print off that test print and everything comes out great, now you want to start designing your own things. But it tells you to open up a slicer. This is real time, not slow-mo.
We slice, we dice. Most importantly, we nice.
Hey everybody, welcome back to E3D, where we make mistakes so you don't have to. For those of you that are new here, I'm Mike, and this is
Sierra.
Or we'll call her the Fruit Ninja. So the question is what was a slicer? What is a slicer? I can tell you when I first started 3D printing and they asked for a slicer, I had no idea what it was. I normally don't read instruction manuals, which probably would have told me.
Typical men stuff.
You can't be sexist. So we were talking about, what's the slicer? And from the comments we got below in a couple of our other videos, we had a couple people asking about the slicer program, the Qidi print. How does it work? Could you do a walkthrough of it? And today, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a walkthrough of it. Now, I'm not going to click on every little detail and show you what every little thing is. I'm going to show you the important things that you need to know, so you know what you can adjust and not to adjust, to make simple adjustments to your prints to make better quality. We're not going to get into some expert level because I'm no expert either. If I was, I wouldn't be on this side of the camera. I would be in the background developing the stuff, and that's not me. So I can't walk you through that.
But I will one day.
One day. And then I'm also going to show you how to set up Cura, which is another slicing program, which is Qidi print, but it's the new ones. Qidi print uses a couple of models behind on it, but it's pretty much the same thing. But I'm going to show you how to set up a profile in there to work. I'm only going to show you how to set up for the X-Max because that's all I have. I don't have the files and everything, but I'll show you how I've got the file that I can drop in that automatically does it. I will also show you how you can manually go through it. So if you do have a X Pro or a Tech One or I don't even remember what all is out there, I will also show you how to get the information to set up your own profile so it works properly.
Exactly.
So let's get into it.
So I'm going to give you this little walkthrough on how to use Qidi print. So I've already imported a model here. We're just going to go over some of the basics here. So you got basically your file, how to bring stuff in, how to save some stuff. Alright, this is clear your bed plates, all that, pretty self-explanatory. View, you've got your solid view, extra view, layer view, and you can mess with your camera position, but you've also got all that down here in this corner, so that tab's kind of pointless when you've got it all right there. Alright, so when we go into settings here, your extruder and your profile, so we've got the X-Max selected, that's what we've got. Printer, we can select this right here. However, if you look over here on the right side of the screen, we've got that all right here. We can switch our printer right here. We can adjust the material that we're using right here. And since we only have one extruder or one hot end, we don't have to worry about setting an active one. And then profile, you can see we've got the fine, extra fine, and high, and that's all right there. So not too much we need to worry about there. Control panel, not going to jump into. The changelog, that just shows you what's been updated from previous versions. Post-processing, alright, so modified G-code, we'll explain this one here in a few. And then configure and your settings visibility. Settings visibility is a big one that I like to use personally, since as you go on, you'll start to realize what you like to use, what you don't like to use, and so you could set this visibility here, and so it will always be visible over here on this side in all your drop-down menus. Alright, so when we go to configure, one thing that you'll want to worry about automatically drop models to the build plate here. So if you've got this unselected, when you come to your model and you go to move it, he'll hover above. So if we go to configure, automatically drop down. A couple other things on here: ensure models are kept apart. So if you try to overlap two models, this will keep bumping them apart, kind of like two magnets with the same polarization where they just keep pushing each other away. Alright, so now that we've set him back to build plate, lift up a little bit, drops him right back down. And then configure visibility settings. So like I said, this one right here is one that I personally like to use. So if you're looking for something specific, you can type it in here and it'll find it. So let's say we want to talk about tree supports. So if we type in tree and under support, it'll pop up here. So this is a quick way to find what you're looking for. Or you can go manually one by one. So the machine type, start and end G code. So this right here, if you're setting up a Cura profile, this is where you will find your start and end G code right here. And then you can go through each one of these and find the ones that you like. So instead of going through each one of these and showing you the ones that I personally use, which doesn't mean they're the best ones and it doesn't mean they're the ones for you, instead of going through these like this and scrolling down through all of them, if you just look right over here onto the right side, they're already all here. So all the ones that I've set up. So if you need to copy your start and G code, you can try to highlight all this. The easiest way to highlight all that is to select it, and then if you're on a Windows computer, hit Control A and that will highlight everything, and then Control C, which will copy and then paste it into Cura. So that's where you get those from. And then your steps per millimeter, these are already automatically set right here. Haven't had to mess with these too much. However, if you start getting into a lot of modifications and have to adjust your E-steps, this is where we'll start to get the end of that. So that's all we're going to talk about for the machine portion of this. Alright, so when we talk to extruder, again, standard 1.75. However, if you get into modification and you decide to add the 2.8 I think it is, then you can go in here, adjust that, and then it'll also start adjusting everything else for you. So your retraction distance, this is just what I prefer. I'm running the Chad mod, so I've got the all metal hot end. So this right here works for me with the retraction speeds. Now we've just printed TPU, I've printed PLA, I've printed nylon carbon fiber, and I've kept them all at this and have had no issues so far. Alright, and then when we come down to layer height, you can look at initial layer height, some adaptive layers here, some wall counts. So this right here, when we talk about shells, or if you hear someone talk about shells, that's where your wall line count, your top layers, and your bottom layers come in. That's what the shell is. So when you hear people talk about adding more shells or how many shells do you have, these are the numbers that they're referring to. And then a couple other things: fill gaps between walls. Do that everywhere, and then filter out tiny little gaps. Now if you've got models that's got holes in them, to filter out tiny little gaps probably is not a good thing, because it'll start to cover those. And then we got print thin walls, and then multiple thicknesses, a couple experimental ones that I've messed with. Don't use a whole lot, but it's there. And then we get down into your infill density, your patterns, and stuff like this. So you can adjust this here, or you've got the slider bar up the top here where you can slide it like this. Trying to get it in the in-betweens, not as easy, so you can just come down here, punch in your number, and you're good to go. So depending on what you're looking for your infill, so if you're looking for grid, that's just the standard infill that I use. A lot of people probably use that. I like to use gyroid personally. And then if you're looking for something that's not strength concentric, that's a good one. However, the walls will not be supported because it's going to follow your walls. So it'll be very flexible there, and depending on what type of filament you're using, it could end up being worse off for you. So I don't mess with the infill pattern too much, just play around with it so you can see what you like. Infill before walls, so you'll see some prints that you'll have the infill and then it'll put the wall around it, so you'll get a little bump on the edges. Me personally, I like putting the infill before the wall. but it's your choice, whatever you're wanting to do. If you want to put the wall first, give it a shot, try it both ways. The only way you're really going to learn this instead of watching these videos is to get out there and try it yourself. So these are the settings I prefer personally. All right, so when we get down into additions here, so initial layer expansion, and as you hover over these, if you got a question of what they are, you hover over it, you'll see the lines or the words pop up and tell you exactly what they are. And so a couple of the ones that you'll want to worry about, the seam corner. So when you see your Z seam, depending on where you put this, you might start seeing those where it looks like it's not actually connecting. So you get your enable ironing, which I personally don't use a whole lot, but it will go over top of it, and it'll kind of, the whole purpose is to try to melt it and give it a smoother look. Depending on what I'm going for, if it's something that I'm going to be printing with an extra fine, or with the extra fine setting here, that might be something I give it a shot, just to see if it helps it, but not something I use a whole lot. So this right here is just for your priming. So you want to put it in advance so it'll just prime it. And that's from where it starts to where it starts making that either your brim or your raft or whatever. This is what that's for. And then your different types of ones that you want to use here. So your skirt's just going to give you a couple of lines around there. It helps with the priming of it. Your brim's going to give you some support if you're printing something that is real tall and real narrow. It gives you an 8mm width. So when we put that on there, I'll just click prepare real quick so you can see this. Alright, so once you slice it, if you click the layer button here, so it's going to process it, and so you can actually scroll through and look and see what all the infill and everything that you've set does. But here's what the brim is. This little piece down here, that just adds to the adhesion of the build plate, so it helps hold it in stronger. So that's what the brim look like. Your skirt's just two lines is what I've got mine set at. That goes around it, and they're 4mm away from the base of your model. And then if you decide to do a raft, so if you're using something that's going to use a bunch of little supports, or it has very minimal pieces that are attached to the build plate, you put a raft there, and what that does is it creates a thick base, so 0.36mm base, and it will have a couple top layers and everything like that. But the purpose of it is to create a solid surface that your prints will stick to. For a lot of the smaller things that I print, I will use a raft for, and some filaments require a raft that I've experienced. Alright, so when we talk about print speeds here, you'll get a couple changes depending on what you're printing at, but most of the time, PLA, I'll print it at 60. I could probably up it depending on the model, or I might need to slow it down depending on the model. If you adjust the configuration here, you're going to get speed changes, especially with PLA. But for these, it just really depends. It's trial and error. So PET-G got to print pretty slow, probably about 30mm where I'm at. TPU, I'm printing anywhere between 15 and 30 depending on the model. So that's where your print speeds come into play. Travel speeds standard 100mm, and then 15 seconds layer time, so that way it has time to cool and everything like that, especially when we're talking PLA. Moving down to temperatures. So when you hear people talking about using the standard profile for PLAs or whatever, this is what they're talking about. So printing temperature 190, build plates, your initial layer, and then after the initial layer drops down. So a lot of my prints, I like to print about 208. And you know it's going to be not standard because you're going to have this little arrow here. So you click that and it's going to jump it back. So print cooling, these will come standard on your PLAs. These is what you want. You definitely want it to, but if you're switching over to, say, ABS, notice how they disappear here because you don't want the cooling with the ABS. So it really just matters. This is what we're talking about when we say try your standard, the standard Qidi settings. These are them right here. Alright, so now when we come down to supports, you've got multiple different supports. Alright, so your first couple options are everywhere. So that means if you've got something that's got a base underneath it and you put everywhere, that means it's going to build your supports on that base of whatever that model is. Now, if you're doing just touching build plate, so anything that hangs over that model. So for this one right here, head back to solid view. So these ears right here, how they hang over right in this area right here. If I put that on just touching build plate, it will not put a support right here to catch that ear, because it will, if it did, it would put it right there, which negates the touching build plate piece. So, and you see the standard setting is everywhere, so you'll get supports all along the arms here, and you'll get them underneath here on top of this little collar piece of his. And so that's what you got to be careful of, depending on what you're doing. Now, if you're using tree supports, which we'll talk about here in a minute, you can put it touching build plate and it will still find a way to get to it depending on the angles. So your support angles 45, and as you can see, everything highlights up here that what needs to be supported that hangs over 45. And as you change this, we'll change it to 75. Notice how a lot of the supports here underneath the ears is now missing. They don't need it now. It really depends on what your bridge settings are, what your model is, how fast you're printing it, what type of material you're using. So this right here is something to play around with till you figure out what works best for you. And after a couple months of printing it, you'll get a good idea of what you can and can't do. Then we get your support patterns here. There's only 7 of them. And again, depends on what you want to fight. If you want ones that come apart, not always fall apart easily, but are easier to get apart, then you got your zigzags. Are kind of like an accordion, how they stretch and unstretch. Your concentric's going to follow the shape of your model. I personally have not used those. I try to stick with zigzags, or I come down here and use the tree supports. So your support density. So if you put it at 10%, then it's going to support like 10% of the models. What every percentage is going to break it down into a percentage, and it'll put their supports there. So if you put it at 100% support density, then you're talking it's going to be all the time. We adjusted support density to 100%. We're going to switch it over to layers here. We'll let it process it, and then I'll show you what that means. So if you look at these supports right here, exactly what it is, it's the density of these supports. So this right here, trying to rip this off, your print might look a little better. However, you're going to be fighting that forever. So if we drop it down to 50, see what it looks like. Alright, so at 50%, now you could see the density, how it was compared to the 100%. So I'll give you a good side-by-side here so you can see what those, can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So I like to leave my support density real low, and my support pillar resolution, the size of my pillars, I like to leave them at about 5 millimeters. Alright, so a couple other things that you can add here. The support Z density. So this is the distance between the top of the support and your model. So that's one layer right there at the layer height I'm running. So that'll give it one layer in between the top of the support and the top of your model. Now, depending on how severe your overhangs are, that's going to give you a little bit of some hanging depending on the distance. Now, if it's within a 5 millimeter and you get your bridge supports on, then it might look a little better. But if it's a strictly 90 degrees right over top the build plate and you put that at 0.2, you're going to get a little sagging there, and you can adjust that. Now, the bigger that support distance, the less likely that it's going to stick to your model, so the supports will be super easy to rip off. However, your model, you're going to lose some quality of your model there. And your support XY distance is the distance from the side of your model and the X and the Y axes to the support. So we're talking about 3.5 layers there. Alright, so now we've got moving down to the tree supports. Now, for the tree supports, this right here takes forever a lot longer to process when we go to slice this, because what it does is it thinks where's the best place to put these tree supports and how are they going to build them up to the pieces they need. So if I take this and put on touching build plate, we'll leave that at 75. That'll limit the amount, and then we will process this so you can see what I'm talking about. Alright, so you can see it took a little bit longer than normal for the tree supports, but here's what it does for you. So as you can see, all these little rings right here, these are the trees that it's talking about. So when we bring this down, it's going to build it right there next to the build plate, and then it's going to support them all the way up. So it's going to catch right here underneath where the fur starts on the neck right there of him. You can see we've got something building out here on a little island right there, and that's why we got a bunch of plates right there. And then you can see on the back side also we've got a bunch coming out. So your bridge settings aren't going to work for most of those, and so that's why those pop up there, and that's why we got the tree supports there. And obviously for the arms and the lightsaber and everything like that. But there's your tree supports. Now I'm going to be honest with you, these things are not an issue to tear off. However, it does waste a considerable amount more of filament. As you can see right now, we're at 199 grams of filament with this, which may not seem like a lot, but once we take off these tree supports, and then you'll see what it's looking at. Alright, so we'll move the tree supports, we'll leave everything the same, we'll just keep it on zigzag. Alright, so as you can see, same settings, using the zigzag, we're at 141 grams, and with the trees, we're at 199 grams. So it will use some more filament. Just be aware of that. Alright, so your Z offset here. So if you are, once you level your build plate, if you start switching filaments and everything, some filaments like to be squished on that first layer, some filaments do not like to be squished on that first layer. So I do a lot of PLA printing, so once I set my bed level, I'm good with it. However, when you start printing other types of filaments, so if you switch to a PET G, you can set your Z offset, and you'd only want to set it by one layer, or 0.1. That way it's just enough so it's not getting as squished as your PLA would be. And then here's a couple of things that I like to keep on there. Union overlapping volumes. Alright, so this just makes sure that everything's overlaps. Prime travel, I don't use it a whole lot, but you can see what it's there for. I personally don't use it. Remove all holes. This will also filter out any holes. So if you've got a, let's say you're printing out the Olympic rings and you click the remove all holes, next thing you're going to get is all the Olympic rings, but they're not rings, now they're just solid discs. So it's going to make sure that all the holes are removed in your stuff. So when you go to make overhead printable here, is what that does, it actually affects your model. So it'll change all your models to whatever your support settings are. So 45 degree, it'll adjust all of them so they're at a minimum of a 45 degree, so that way they can print them without any supports. So this will actually change your model. Spiralize. This right here is fun if you're trying to print vases and you got some pretty cool filaments that you want to test out. Click this. It's just one layer, or you can adjust to 2 layers where it'll just literally go all the way around. Now this right here is not good for models like this because it prints multiple areas because the arms hang down, so it would have to skip and then go out there. So this is for one continuous print is what this is for. You can make some pretty cool vases and stuff out of this. It is pretty nice. Your bridge settings, what you want to do here is once you print out a temp tower, it'll show that how your bridging looks. So where it jumps from one pillar to the next pillar, you'll see where it sags or whatever. So your bridge settings at about 5mm is a good distance for your bridge setting. Once you start getting over that, that's where it can start getting a little iffy and start getting a little bit of sag. Now on the temp tires, some of them have got gaps. Some of them got gaps that are probably about 10-15mm, and you're going to get some sagging in there. But the bridge settings, what it does is it will decrease the flow and move the filament across to try to get it to connect, so it doesn't get that sagging. But it helps when it comes to printing some things. I like to keep it on because most of my models have got some area where it needs to be, the bridge needs to go. All right, and the last thing we got down here, so these are just a couple different things. Merged overlap. So this right here, just make sure that your meshes are touching so there's no issues, and it gives it a distance. So you can adjust this if you're starting to see that maybe you're starting to get pieces that bulge out a little more. You can adjust that here. And then flow rate, that really depends on what type of filament you're using, or if you're switching to a different nozzle, or you're trying to get a bigger line. So if you're running a 0.4 nozzle and you're wanting 0.4 for your first layer, I mean, you would have to increase your flow rate. I believe it's like 125, 150, something like that, so it can push it through. But then you also got to slow down your settings. So your flow rate with your speed, and depending on the material, this right there is just a balancing act. If you're printing PLA, I highly recommend you just keep it at this setting until you start to figure out the different tweaks that you can do. Now, if you just want to see what everything looks like, you can come down in here in the expert mode, and this right here's everything that we've pretty much talked about, and you can see the ones that are clicked are the ones I've got. So you can just go down through these things and change whatever you want, adjust whatever settings you need to adjust, and it's all right there in expert mode. Like I said, me personally, I just have it on the side over there. Now, if you're going to be setting up something where you'll be printing the same thing over and over and over again, then you could save this as your personal setting for this one, and set up that setting so when you come back to print it again, it's always there. I personally don't use this. I know a lot of people do. It saves time, but I'm constantly changing what I print just to make sure everyone gets something that they wanted on the printer. So that's the grid setting right there, and not sure if I talked about it, but this is the front of the printer. You can tell by the arrow there. The other way to do that is to look at the screws. It's set up just like your printer, 2 in the front, 1 in the back. If you're using the X-Max, if you're using something else, then it'll be a little bit different. Now, a couple things that I'll show you real quick. You can use them, you don't have to use them. Some of these get in here, you can adjust each little model setting. There's a lot of things you could do here. You could add some custom supports. But one thing that you can do is support blocker. So we'll throw this back into solid mode. We'll find some blue up here. So let's say right here on the front of his little thing, we don't want supports right there. So when we double click, it shows up. If you click it again, disappears. So double click it. We can move it. We can scale it. So let's scale this, and we've got the uniform scaling here. So if I want to move it in the X direction and I don't want it to move in the Y or the Z, then I just have to take this off. And then snap scaling is going to jump it every couple degrees or every few millimeters, whatever it is. I don't use that one, but so we'll set the blocker right here. We'll adjust it over so it's in the center. And you know what, let's make it a little bit bigger so we can get rid of a bunch of supports up here in the front. Alright, so we're going to get rid of all these supports right here. So whatever this is touching, if it requires a support, the purpose of this is to block that. So now we'll prepare it and we'll see what it does. Alright, so now we click it back over to layer here, let it process it. And now you can see all the supports that we wanted that were right here are now missing because of that support blocker. So if you've got a bunch of excess supports that you don't want, now the reason you still see these supports coming up here is because we didn't actually have this cube touching these areas of the model. And so it will still build up to the areas that it needs, but as you can see, the supports right here are no longer there. Now, if you don't have an X-Max, you can come up here and you can click on whatever one you have. So if you've got a Tech 1, you can switch over to the Tech 1, and this is a dual extruder, so it will show you how that works. And this goes for any of the ones that you've got up here as soon as it gets done thinking. And you can put whichever one you want up here. So head back over to the X-Max. And there we go. Let's say we want to color the tips of these little horns up here. Alright, so what we need to do is find the layer that we actually want to do this at. So what we don't want to do is to cut off the ears. So, okay, we're hitting ears, head. So right there, we're just going to cut the very tips of these horns and change them a different color. It's honestly something pointless to do, but it's a way of showing it to you. So you can see we're going to paint the tips of these. So we're at layer 705 that you can see right here. So what we want to do up here is under extensions, post-processing, modify G-code. Once you modify the G-code, as you notice down here, prepare button highlights back up because now we're modifying the G-code, so therefore it's going to change the slicing of it. So we want to add a script here. What we're going to do is pause at a height. Alright, so we will pause at layer, and then we will pause at layer 705. And we will close it. And that's it. And so now once we hit prepare, it'll pause it at that layer. At that time, you can adjust your filament or whatever. Just be careful. I have not used this pause setting here. I prefer to do it personally at the printer, but you can pause it with the G-code settings here. Now, where modifying the G-code comes in handy is let's say we're trying to build a temp tower. What we want to do is we'll add a couple scripts real quick. We're going to change them at the Z. Alright, so what we're going to do is layer number. So let's say our starting temp is going to be 1, we'll say 230, right? So we'll say 50 layers up, and once you put your temp tower in here, this is where you go in, you'll slice it, find out what each layer is. Normally most of them are like 54, 104, 154, things like that. So you just got to find the layer that you want it to actually change at. So once you find those layers, what you want to do is put it at a 50 or put it whatever. I'm saying it's 50 here, but it might be different depending on the temp tower you use. So 50, and then what we want the behavior to do. Now, if you do single layer here, what this is going to do is it's going to only print that single layer at that temp. So we want to keep that value. So it's going to change the layers here. And is what we're going to do is to change extruder 1 temp. We only have one extruder, right? So we said we were starting it at, we're saying 230. So then this one, we want drop this one down to 225. Okay. And then when we come to this one, again, layer number, we're going to call it 100. Keep the value. It's going to change in one layer. Temp, 220. Then the next one, again, and we will do this over and over. So again, 150, keep value. One layer we want it to change, and we want to change that temp down to 215. So this right here is how you set up to print your temp towers, and this is how you can modify the G-code to change temperatures, to pause your printer. Now if you go into Cura, it has a lot more options here. However, I'm just walking you through this one so you can see how this works, and then you can play around with this. But if you're wanting to print a temp tower, this is how you do it right here. So once you have that, hit the close button, and you can prepare it again, and while it's preparing, it'll get everything set up. It's already modified your G-code. Now, one thing to remember is that when you go back into this, you have to remove those extensions. And then now I'm going to show you how to set up the profile in Cura. So you can either use Qidi print or you can use Cura. So here we're going to set up Cura for the first time. And then you see the Qidi printers are not set up in here. So what we're going to do is go to custom. Now we're going to install the file, but I'm going to show you how we go through it. Go and type in the printer name, hit the next button, and then we'll put in our printer settings. So you'll see the 300, 250, 300, and it uses a Marlin G code. Now, I know we're going to install the file. We just do that, punch in whatever numbers you want, but then you can grab the file, bring it over, and you want to open it as a project. And as you open it as a project, you can go back into the settings and look and see how it sets it up. So that's the easy way to do it. I'll provide the link for you below. If you don't have access or if you don't have an Xmax, don't worry about it. I'll show you where to pull that information for your other printers too. And here I'm showing you where to pull your start G code and your NG code to install into Cura in case you don't have an Xmax like I do and you can't access the file. I know I talked about this at the beginning of the video using your Control A and Control C if you're using a Windows computer, but here you can see us highlighting it, copying it, and pasting it over there.
So now that we've gone on a walkthrough through the Qidi print, hopefully you have a better understanding of what it can do and what some of the settings are that you can adjust and all that. And we also showed you how to set up Cura with the Xmax profile, and hopefully that walkthrough shows you how to get that information to set it up for any of your other Qidi printers. But I'm not going to compare the two, how they do print quality wise and stuff like that. I'll let you decide which one you prefer working with and then stick with it. That way you can hammer out all the little details of that slicer and create better prints. So for us here at eTrue3D, thank you very much. Don't forget to go down into the comments section, tell us what you liked or what you didn't like about this video. Make sure you let us know how we can improve and what we left out of this video, so that way we can try to correct that. Then they had to do what?
Like, subscribe, hit the bell notification button, and check out other videos. Cheers.